So our message to these foreign terrorist organizations is we will treat you like we have treated Al-Qaeda.
We don't mind if the U.S. Army could take charge. So Christians are not being scared.
Some Muslims are real Muslims and some are just covering up as a Muslim, and they are terrorists.
President Trump is threatening to cut aid to Nigeria. He says that if the Nigerian government continues to allow, quote, the killing of Christians.
If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria.
Focus. U.S. President Donald Trump has said he is considering a range of military options in Nigeria after threatening to intervene over the killing of Christians in the African nation.
American troops just landed in Nigeria, and the reason Washington gave for sending them doesn't match what's actually happening on the ground. The Trump administration says they're there to stop a Christian genocide. But when you look at the data, when you talk to people in the areas where violence is actually occurring, when you check where the bombs fell and who they were supposed to protect, the story falls apart completely. And by the end of this, you'll understand why US troops are really in Nigeria, what the evidence shows about religious violence in the country, and why this deployment has almost nothing to do with protecting Christians. In November of 2025, President Donald Trump made a dramatic announcement. He claimed that Christians in Nigeria were facing an existential threat, that thousands were being slaughtered by Islamic radicals, and that if Nigeria's government didn't stop it, America would go in with guns blazing to wipe out the terrorists.
If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. We're going to do things to Nigeria that Nigeria is not going to be happy about.
He ordered the Pentagon to prepare for possible military action. He called Nigeria a disgraced country.
And may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns are blazing.
And he made it clear that the United States would not stand by while Christians were being killed. The language was direct and forceful. Trump posted on Truth Social that America might go into Nigeria to completely eliminate Islamic terrorists who were committing what he called horrible atrocities against Christians.
To completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible, horrible atrocities.
He said if America attacked, it would be fast, vicious, and sweet. Republican lawmakers echoed his claims, with some saying that 50,000 Christians had been killed since 2009, others claiming the number was as high as 100,000. The narrative was simple and emotional. Christians were being targeted, Muslims were doing the killing, and America needed to act. Nigeria's government immediately pushed back. President Bola Tinubu and his advisors said the characterization of Nigeria as a place where Christians were being systematically targeted was a gross misrepresentation of reality.
The report or notion that there is a Christian persecution or genocide in Nigeria is false. False both from the premise and the conclusion. It is not supported by data.
They pointed out that armed groups in Nigeria, including Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa Province, attack everyone regardless of religion. They bomb mosques, they bomb churches, they bomb markets and bus stops and refugee camps. The violence is horrific, but it's not a religious genocide. It's terrorism mixed with banditry, ethnic conflict, and competition over land and water resources. But the Trump administration wasn't backing down. In late November, the State Department designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern for religious freedom violations. Congressman Riley Moore introduced a resolution condemning the persecution of Christians in Nigeria. Senator Ted Cruz pushed for sanctions against Nigerian officials who he claimed were complicit in the killings. The pressure kept building, and behind the scenes, the US military started preparing. In late November of 2025, American surveillance flights began over Nigeria. Contractor-operated planes took off from Ghana, flew over Nigerian territory collecting intelligence, and then returned to Accra. The company running the flights, Tenax Aerospace, works closely with the US military. Flight tracking data showed repeated missions over northern and northwestern Nigeria. The US was mapping targets, building a picture of where militants were operating, getting ready to strike. Then came Christmas Day. On December 25, 2025, the US Navy destroyer USS Paul Ignatius, stationed in the Gulf of Guinea, fired more than a dozen Tomahawk cruise missiles at targets in northwestern Nigeria. The official statement from US Africa Command said the strikes targeted ISIS training camps in Sokoto State. President Trump posted on Truth Social calling it a Christmas present for terrorists. He said the strikes were against ISIS terrorist scum who had been targeting and viciously killing primarily innocent Christians. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said the operation fulfilled the president's demand that the killing of Christians must end. But here's where the story gets complicated. The missiles struck in Sokoto state, which is in Nigeria's predominantly Muslim northwest. The area where Trump and Republican lawmakers claimed Christians were being systematically killed is not Sokoto. It's the Middle Belt, a region in central Nigeria, where there's violent conflict between mostly Muslim herders from the Fulani ethnic group and mostly Christian farmers from various minority ethnic groups. That conflict is brutal and deadly, but it's not happening in Sokoto. It's hundreds of miles away. The village of Jabo in Sokoto state, where debris from one of the missiles landed, is a quiet farming community with a Muslim majority and a small Christian minority who live peacefully together. Residents told reporters they had never experienced terrorist attacks. They said Christians and Muslims coexist without conflict. The local lawmaker described Jabo as a peaceful community with no known history of ISIS, Lakurawa, or any other terrorist groups operating in the area. Yet a missile fell just 500 meters from the village's only health clinic, sending people running in fear. No one was killed, but the confusion and terror were real. Another piece of missile debris landed in Offa, a town in Kwara State nearly 600 miles away from the intended target. Buildings were damaged. Again, no casualties. But the fact that unexpended munitions from the strike ended up scattering across such a wide area raised serious questions about what exactly was hit and whether the intelligence was accurate. The Nigerian government said the strikes, which were coordinated with Nigerian authorities, targeted ISIS hideouts in the forests of Tangaza district in Sokoto. Foreign Minister Yusuf Tuggar confirmed that President Tinubu had given approval for the operation, but days after the strikes, there was still no independent confirmation that any militants had been killed. US Africa Command claimed that multiple ISIS terrorists died in the camps, but there was no evidence provided. No bodies, no names, just an initial assessment. Security analysts in Nigeria were baffled. They said if you were going to strike jihadist groups in Nigeria, Sokoto would be one of the last places you'd choose. The real centers of Boko Haram and Islamic State activity are in the northeast, in states like Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa. That's where tens of thousands of people have been killed over more than a decade of insurgency. That's where suicide bombings happen regularly. That's where entire towns have been overrun by militants. But the US didn't strike there. It struck in the northwest, where the security situation is different. The group that operates in Sokoto is called Lakurawa. They emerged around 2017 as an anti-bandit force that local communities initially welcomed because the government couldn't protect them from criminals. But over time, Lakurawa became oppressive. They started imposing strict Islamic rules on the villages they controlled. They kidnapped children to fill their ranks. They clashed with local authorities. Nigeria declared them a terrorist organization and said they had suspected affiliations with Islamic State, though some analysts believe they're actually linked to Al-Qaeda. The situation is murky, but what's clear is that Lakurawa is not the group systematically killing Christians in central Nigeria. Their operations and the farmer-herder violence in the Middle Belt are separate issues. And here's the uncomfortable truth about the genocide claims. The data doesn't support them. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, which tracks violence globally, out of more than 20,000 civilians killed in attacks in Nigeria between January 2020 and September 2025, 317 deaths were from attacks specifically targeting Christians, while 417 were from attacks specifically targeting Muslims. That's not to say Christians aren't suffering. They absolutely are. But so are Muslims. So are people of no particular faith who just happen to live in areas where armed groups operate. Boko Haram and its splinter groups have killed tens of thousands of Muslims. They've bombed mosques, attacked marketplaces in Muslim communities, and massacred people they consider insufficiently devout. In August of 2025, at least 50 worshippers were killed when gunmen attacked a mosque in Katsina State. On Christmas Eve 2025, just one day before the US strikes, a suicide bomber attacked a mosque in Maiduguri, killing at least 5 people and injuring more than 30. The violence is indiscriminate. It's devastating entire communities regardless of religion. Experts who study Nigeria's security situation say the Christian genocide narrative is a dangerous oversimplification. Bulama Bukati, a Nigerian human rights lawyer and security analyst, told reporters that all the data reveals there is no Christian genocide going on in Nigeria. He called it a far-right narrative that's been simmering for a long time and that Trump is now amplifying. He said it's divisive and will only increase instability because it misrepresents a complex situation and ignores the reality that armed groups target everyone. The violence in Nigeria has multiple layers. In the northeast, you have Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa province carrying out a jihadist insurgency that's been going on since 2009. In the northwest, you have banditry, kidnapping for ransom, and groups like Lakurawa that started as vigilantes but became predators. In the middle belt, you have violent clashes between herders and farmers over access to land and water, conflicts that have killed more people than Boko Haram in recent years according to some estimates. These are overlapping crises with different causes, different actors, and different solutions. Treating them all as one unified campaign of Christian persecution doesn't just miss the point, it makes the situation worse. But despite all of this, despite the Nigerian government's objections, despite the data showing that Muslims are also victims, despite experts saying the genocide claims are false, the Trump administration kept moving forward. And in February of 2026, US Africa Command confirmed that American troops had been deployed to Nigeria. General Dagvin Anderson, the head of US Africa Command, announced that a small team of US military personnel had been sent to Nigeria. He said the deployment came after he met with President Tinubu in Rome during the Akaba Process Summit in October of 2025. They discussed working together on a way forward in the region, and that led to increased collaboration between the two countries. Anderson described the American team as bringing unique capabilities to augment what Nigeria has been doing for several years. He didn't say how many troops were sent. He didn't say exactly when they arrived. He didn't specify what their mission was beyond providing capabilities. But the fact that US boots are now on the ground in Nigeria, even in small numbers, represents a significant escalation. This is the first time the US has deployed troops to Nigeria in this capacity. And it comes after the first US missile strikes ever conducted in the country. In January of 2026, the US delivered military equipment to Nigeria. Africa Command said the delivery supported Nigeria's ongoing operations and emphasized the shared security partnership between the two countries. In February, just before the troop deployment was announced, US military legal advisors traveled to Bamako and conducted the first military-to-military engagement with Mali in 5 years, signaling a broader shift in American strategy across West Africa. The US is trying to regain a foothold in a region where it lost influence after being pushed out of Niger and Mali by military governments that turned to Russia instead. And that context matters, because Nigeria isn't just another country. It's the most populous nation in Africa with over 200 million people. It's a major oil producer. It sits at a strategic crossroads between West and Central Africa. It has significant mineral resources, and it's one of the few remaining American partners in a region where France has been forced out and Russia has moved in. Losing Nigeria would be a disaster for US interests in Africa. So when Trump talks about protecting Christians, you have to ask what else is driving this sudden military engagement. The timing is revealing. The US lost its drone base in Niger in 2024 after the military government there ordered American forces to leave. Wagner Group, the Russian private military company, established a presence in Mali and then rebranded as Africa Corps under direct Russian state control. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formed the alliance of Sahel states and withdrew from Western partnerships entirely. The US watched its counter-terrorism infrastructure in the Sahel collapse. It lost intelligence networks. It lost access to strategic locations. It lost leverage. Nigeria is the last major American partner left in the region, and the Nigerian government has been struggling with multiple security crises for years without enough resources or international support. When Trump threatened to invade, Nigeria could have told him to back off. Instead, they coordinated. They gave approval for the strikes. They welcomed the military team. They accepted the equipment deliveries. Because from Nigeria's perspective, American support, even if it comes with political complications, is better than facing Boko Haram, bandits, and insurgents alone. But for the people on the ground, the ones actually living with the violence, the US intervention raises more questions than it answers. Will American strikes actually weaken the armed groups or just scatter them into new areas? Will the focus on ISIS in Sokoto do anything to stop the farmer herder violence in the Middle Belt? Will the genocide narrative, which doesn't match reality, make it harder to address the actual causes of conflict? And will the US stick around long enough to help build lasting security? Or will this be another short-term military operation that leaves Nigeria dealing with the consequences when American attention moves elsewhere? The missionary struck in Jabo said something that captures the confusion perfectly. He told reporters that Jobo is a peaceful place where Christians and Muslims live as brothers, where there are no religious conflicts, and where no one expected missiles to fall from the sky on Christmas night. The fact that US military action supposedly aimed at protecting Christians ended up terrifying a community where Christians and Muslims coexist peacefully tells you everything about how disconnected the political narrative is from the reality on the ground. Nigeria is facing a genuine security crisis. People are dying. Communities are being displaced. Armed groups are operating with impunity in areas where the government has little presence. But calling it a Christian genocide, targeting strikes in areas that don't match the political claims, and deploying troops without addressing the root causes of violence won't solve those problems. It might serve American strategic interests. It might satisfy a political base back home. But for Nigerians, both Christian and Muslim, who are living through the violence every day, the question isn't whether America cares about their suffering. The question is whether America understands what's actually happening. And right now, the evidence suggests it doesn't.